So we are going to replay the webinar from the beginning, and at the end, I will take live questions. Thank you very much.
Hi, good morning and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shifa Domi. I'm a product manager with Exfo. Today we're going to be talking about how we can solve small cell deployment challenges as small cell deployments are ramping up around the world. And we'll talk about the different approaches, the different ideas, and different challenges. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so as probably everybody knows, the small cell deployment are growing exponentially. If we look at this research that was done by Infonetics, the expectation is we're going to have over 3 million sites in the next few years, and with a growth of 3.4 million small cell deployments in the next 5 years. Typically, those research is talking about both indoor and outdoor deployments, just not counting the femtocells. Having all those deployments, in a rapid and short time frame is going to create a lot of challenges, both from, turn up, commissioning, but also monitoring. When we look at the sheer number of devices that are going to have to be managed and turn out, how many aggregation points that are going to be added into the network to be able to support those number of deployments or those number of small cells is just going to keep adding to potential failures in the network. Also, when we look at the different service providers and the strategies of deploying those small cells, we see that there are multiple or different technologies that are emerging across the board, in North America, but also in Asia and Europe. Those technologies are very different from each other. And in some cases, especially in North America, we see that a single service provider may be deploying 2 or 3 different technologies based on the locations, based on the terrain, and based on other components. And next slide, please. Exfo have conducted a survey in the last 6 months or so, and we talked to our customers both in North America and in Europe. And really the question was very simple, is, how much time does it take you to deploy a small cell? And if you can give us what are the different components. So, and really, this is something that we were expecting to see. And typically, what we have seen is 26% of the time is spent in, turning up those new cell sites that are deployed and also commissioning them. What that means is there is a large amount of time that is spent that can be compressed. And the reason why we want to compress that is just when you compare macro cell deployment to small cell deployment, the number is 4 to 5 folds. So obviously what the service providers are doing today to deploy macro cells cannot be replicated, cannot be taken as is. So all those methods and procedures that they are using today have to change. Otherwise, they are not going to be able to scale, or the cost of deploying the small cell is just going to skyrocket. So those are, that brings quite a bit of challenges from that perspective. The other parts that we look at while deploying a small cell that our service providers are telling us is multiplication of units, the number of data and the amount of data that is being collected. So not only just testing of or the deployment of the small cells, but all these data collections, all the volume of data that needs to be managed, that needs to be ingested, but also they need to make sure that from a monitoring perspective, they have the right tools, the right resources to be able to see when there are issues. Instead of seeing, single alarms coming from single cell site, they want to ensure that they are able to look at the problem, be able to correlate multiple problems into one to be able to cope with the volume. Let me go to the next slide. Okay. So today we are going to, we're going to look at three main topics when it comes to automating small cell activation and assurance. The first one is the activation. What does it take? How does it work today? How it should work in the future? And we'll talk about some ideas. Once the activation is done, in terms of validation, what will it take to validate the service and that everything is working? And obviously, once everything is up and running, how do you monitor those small sites? So those small cell sites to make sure that your operations are not overwhelmed with the volume of data or the volume of events that may be added to the mix. So in terms of activations, when we look at how the activation is done today, really you have typically for macro cell or even for early deployment of small cells, you have two methodologies. The first one is you have technicians that go install the small cell, power it up, install it in the building, and typically you would have a second technician, and in some cases even a third technician that go in to be able to do the connectivity, do initial connectivity testing, and then in some cases we have seen a third technician come in and do really the activation and commissioning. And the reason of that is they're just taking the same method and procedures that they used to use for macro cells, just of the complexity of the macro cell. Now, in terms of small cell, the complexity is a lot less, but also there are tools and there are applications like some of the expert solutions that are out there that can automate a lot of that. So instead of sending three technicians, each one doing one part, which makes the cost a lot higher, there are other approaches that can be done. The first one is allowing the service provider to have a centralized system that do that turnout. So all the data will go to a single place. The second part is automating as much as possible of that process. Other than the building and putting the small cell physically on a pole or on the side of the building or even indoors, it really doesn't matter from that perspective if it's an indoor or outdoor. You want something to automate. So having applications that are very simple, like a smart app on the technician's phone that allows him to very quickly, for example, type a job ID, have all the information pulled in from his cell site. For example, you can have integration with the back office application that connects the job ID to all the information of the cell site. And all what the technician will be required to do is hit a start button to say, now I am at cell site X, I want to activate it. And at that point, they can run any RFC or any test procedure they have. So that's one approach. Even if you go with the non-centralized approach with handheld devices, there are methodologies and applications that exist today and are offered also by Expo, is to be able to automatically detect that a small cell was added to the network. So we can listen to network notifications each time a small cell is connected and automate that process. Each time we see a new cell site, we can go out and automatically initiate an activation procedure. So once that turn up is done, as I said, we can use any of the standards that the different service providers are using. The second phase really is to be able to test or validate the service. I'm sorry. So from a validation perspective, is you want a same or different set of tools that will allow you to do service validation. So it's not just filling up the pipe to make sure that the pipe is going to be able to handle the traffic. Now you want to go a little bit further to make sure that the applications that the users are going to be running, like YouTube, HTTP, web browsing, or Facebook. So any of those applications need to be tested. So having tools in the hands of the technician without in his smartphone, and allowing them to, from a UE, to be able to call in and say, here are the set of applications that I want to run or I want to test, and go and run them in certain sequence, will be very beneficial from a time perspective. And having all that information reported back to a centralized system, for historical trending and for the NOC to be able to troubleshoot in these three issues becomes really critical. So in essence, giving a technician a very simple applications on their mobiles, which, we know today that all of them have, they go with company mobile. So have those applications available to them with just click of a button and the ability to see a green light to red light and not something complicated will be extremely helpful for them. So that will allow them to speed up the process and not have to spend that 26% of the time doing the testing and the turn up. But we believe that we can reduce that to literally 2 or 3%. So the time that they can save, if we can save our customers about 25% of the time, I think that will be, we'll call it mission accomplished. So those are the type of, tools or the type of applications that are being deployed, helping service providers in terms of deploying a large number of small cells. Now, I talked a little bit about, automating the process. So really, typically, technicians that you want to send in the field, you don't want to overload them with a lot of information and, give them a lot of work to do if we want to automate the process. So the idea is to have a back office application, like a workflow management that allow, the person in the NOC to say, for the method and procedure that we want to deploy, after a turn-up is done, here are the number of tasks that we want to run, and here is the sequence of that testing. And we want to run all of these, and once all of them are available, report back to the back office, but also show the technician, a green light or red light if everything is working properly. So having workflow management, having those type of applications that part of them are running in an OSS in the back office, and the other part, or the UI part of it, is running on the technician UE, will be extremely helpful for that shortening time process. Now, once the activation is done, obviously you want to monitor the system. And typically today, when we look at most of the deployments, at least that Expo have been engaged with their customers, is the technician goes on site, does the turn up, does the validation. He will go back home, or he will go back to the office, upload all that information, and then we'll go to some third-party system and say, okay, I have been to all these 5 jobs today, and I want to start monitoring them. Now, if you remember, the workflow management that we had, or that can be used or leveraged to do the turn up and the commissioning, the same workflow can be leveraged to automatically, once everything is green, we can connect to the existing OSS applications and monitoring systems and say, this small cell was just added to the network and it was turned up and commissioned properly. Now we want, the OSS system and the testing platform to start monitoring it from an SLA perspective. So again, instead of waiting those 1 hour, 3 hours, 5 hours that it takes the technician to go back home and do all that process manually, we can completely offload that and add that to the at the tail of the workflow to allow them to monitor those small cells immediately after the turn up and commissioning is done. So that again, allows better visibility and faster time without having to take a lot of this time and resource. So when we look at the monitoring, there is multiple aspects of the monitoring. Obviously, you want to monitor the backhaul, everything that happens between that cell that was deployed all the way to your Metso or MSC. But there is a lot of other, areas, adding more small cells into your network is going to add more constraint on the capacity. So there is a lot of capacity needs that are going to be added, but also there is a lot of other aspects in terms of latency, byte loss, and jitter that will start being injected in the network, and we need to make sure that the service providers, once they deploy those, new, 5,000, 10,000, 50,000 small cells in their network, that they would have enough capacity to be able to run properly. So being able to look at a monitoring from an end-to-end perspective is going to become really critical. So applications that run on mobiles that can give you customer experience will allow you to have some better visibility in terms of what is the customer experience. So you will be able to test, the same applications or the most popular applications that the users are using, like the YouTube and Facebook, or video streaming or anything like that. From a mobile, so that would be testing from the mobile all the way, to the P gateway. But also being able to segment and show the network from a segment perspective and from an end-to-end perspective is going to be critical. So we can say by adding n number of small cells in this particular region, here is the trend we see, here is how much, addition or how much load it was done on the backhaul itself, but also from the backhaul, to the P gateway, to the IMS, and to the ISP. So having that visibility, having that trending available to you is going to allow you to control how you introduce your small cells. And you are not going to be oversubscribing your network, and making sure that you have that visibility that is needed. So, small cell deployments are, as I said, are becoming very, very popular. But there are a lot of different technologies that are being deployed right now around the world, with some lead from North America, like DAS, like carrier Wi-Fi, and those deployments have exactly the same requirement. Maybe the approach that some service providers are different when it comes to DAS or carrier Wi-Fi than small cell. But from our perspective, from X4 perspective, we believe that the applications, the tools, and the approach, is very similar. So there is a lot of things that can be done to harmonize, that deployment. So the same technician that you are sending to do outdoor small cell deployment, you can give him exactly the same tool and applications to do indoor, to do DAS, or to do Wi-Fi deployment. And by doing that, you can cut on the cost, you can cut on the training, and you don't have to maintain 4, 5, 6 different tools. You can maintain a single tool that allows you to do all of them at the same time. And when we look at the different approaches that exist, really the one that stand from the crowd is service modeling. And really the concept of service modeling is to be able to model a service with all the infrastructure that is underneath it, regardless of the technology, regardless of the domain, regardless of the customer specific deployment. So for example, you will have a carrier that will use CPRI to deploy small cell. Some of them will have, fiber all the way. So the approaches are different. But if we have something, a better service modeling that allows you to merge those, service layer and overlay it on top of the technology, which is the network layer, you will be able to have tools and applications that work seamlessly across the board, regardless of the technology you use, regardless of your deployment. And that also allows you to be able to combine that information with different data sources from a monitoring perspective. So you can be looking at active testing, you can be looking at passive monitoring, but also you can be pulling the devices to see the bandwidth utilization, the CPU utilization, and all those counters that will affect your service at the end of the day. And being able to correlate that information is going to become critical. And at least the approach that X4 is taking is, moving toward a much more generic service modeling that will give you that leverage, that will give you that single tool to do all those deployments. And, the benefits of the service modeling, and this is just an example that we have here on the right for a given customer with all the services and sub-services. As I said earlier, it will allow you to federate and aggregate the data from different sources. So it can start with small cell, but all the data will get aggregated, at the metso level, from there to the P gateway to the IMS to ISP. So as you go up the chain into your network, you want to keep track of the effect or, the impact that the small cell deployment is having on the rest of your network. So having that correlation, having that impact analysis, and make it seamless, regardless if you have deployed small cells indoor, small cells outdoor, DAS, all those components at the end of the day will go to the same part of the network. They will all affect your core. They will all affect your ISP and IMS. So having that single platform allowing you to collect all that data and push it in a single application will become critical. And that obviously will translate to a better monitoring and better predictability in terms of SLA. And that in turn allows you to have a better control of the customer experience that goes down all the way to the macro cells and small cells that you have deployed in your network. As I said, it's really important. All these things are going to help you from two different aspects. And those are just two examples that we have here. When you look at new deployment, two things that you really need to focus on in terms of adding, a large number of small cells into your network. The first one is making sure that you have enough capacity and you plan accordingly. The worst that can happen is you deploy 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 new small cells, and you figure out too late that these deployments are having a very bad effect on your core network or on your IMS or some other part of your network that will not necessarily touch initially. The second part is what I would qualify by the human part, or the operational efficiency. You want to make sure that you filter out and you correlate properly the amount of data, the amount of events that are going to be generated by those new deployments. So you want to make sure that you don't overwhelm your operations, because the last thing you want is having to double or triple your operations in terms of resources to be able to cope with those new applications and the new problems that may be caused by the small cell deployments. Last is I just want to close with a number of applications that X4 is pushing to the market for small cell, and again, regardless if it's indoor, outdoor, but it really applies equally to Wi-Fi or DAS, is that ability to plug and play. So the ability to automatically detect that new small cells are being installed, or to have what we call a zero-touch, test and turn up. That will allow you to very easily, detect that a new cell site was added, or give the right tools to your technicians in the field to allow them to very quickly, turn up those sites. Lastly is to allow you to have that particular visibility to your operations, and also to have single tools to do that. You really do not want to have one tool managing DAS, one tool managing small cell, one tool managing Wi-Fi. Really, you want to take one single approach all the way from turn up, commissioning, but also monitoring and troubleshooting. Thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions, please go ahead and ask.
Okay, thank you for listening to the webinar. We're going to go to the Q&A section, but before we do that, there is a survey at the end of this session. So if you can please take a few moments to fill in the survey, that would be really appreciated. So without further ado, I'm just going to go through the questions that we received so far. So the first question I have here is, how different is LTE commissioning from 3G? Okay, so that's really a great question. So there are multiple ways to look at it. The first one is, from a technology perspective, obviously there is a major difference between the two. So when we look at the service providers' method and procedures, or MOPS, most of service providers, not all of them, they have a completely different MOPS. In some cases, even different crews that are doing the commissioning of LTE and 4G. But from an X4 perspective, the good news is, from a test field equipment, we have a lot of automations in our processes and in our solutions that will allow you to create a simplified or streamlined MOP for both 4G and LTE. So when you have the technicians in the field, they have to turn on a new service or a new cell site. It becomes really transparent for them if it's an LTE or a 4G deployment. Now, from a monitoring and troubleshooting perspective, it's a little bit, we took the same approach. So we have automation systems that allow you to, I would say, mask the physical differences and technology differences between the two. So it makes it a lot easier, a lot simpler from, for your NOC, for your deployment team, for your turn-up teams, to have a single solution that allows them to look at both of them. The second question I have here is, there's a lot of industry discussion about NFV. Do you have a view on how it will affect commissioning and deployment process and timescale? Yes, for sure there will be an impact. Now, each service provider is going to take a completely different approach, or at least initially. We have seen some service providers starting with EPC. So now they are talking about, the EPC and some other, different aspects. So from that perspective, it's the same thing. There is a lot of, methods and procedures that not necessarily from a deployment perspective that are going to be different, but especially, at least at the beginning, from a monitoring and commissioning perspective. So make sure that, the turn-up is working properly, the components that needs to be tested and need to be troubleshooted are going to be very different. So from that perspective, it's the same thing. During the presentation, and you can read about it a little bit more on the x4.com website, is we've taken a little bit of different approach from that, where we allow service providers to model the services in a dynamic way. So even if you have a hybrid deployment, let's say you have part of your network deploying EPC and part of your network deploying a virtual EPC. That's some of the challenges we see. And by doing service modeling or dynamic service modeling, what we allow them to look at is an abstraction layer. Regardless if you are deploying NFV or not, you will see the items or you see your services exactly the same way. Now, when you drill down to the details, you are going to see the differences between one is a regular, I would say, equipment. In another case, for NFV, you will see, VNFs. You are going to see, servers and different type of components. But at least from a service level perspective, that abstraction layer hides or masks that complexity. The other question I have here, and I'll just try to make sure that I understand the question, what's a recommended start configuration to test the solution? So really, I think there are different aspects, right? The first aspect is while you are building small cell. So when we look at that, there are, when you look at X4, we have a range of field test equipment that will allow you, while you are building, building small cells or macro cells, allow you to do the turn up. So that's one aspect of it. So I would say, that's the basic, that's where you start. Now, once it's up and running, once it's, you go to deployment and you want to monitor and troubleshoot, from our perspective, the monitoring solution, you should have something in place, I would say, immediately and not have necessarily to wait until you start deploying those small cells. So, an analytics platform like X4 Extract will allow you to automate the turn-up, will allow you to automate the service validation, so it's not just filling up the pipe, but filling up the pipe with the right services, with the right schemes to allow you to simulate what your customers are going to be doing, but also take all that information and transition it to the monitoring so you have visibility on how your network or how your small cells, macro cells behave during the turn up and commissioning, and also how they should behave. So that becomes your baseline, I would say. And then you take that, and as you are monitoring your system, you can compare yourself, by analyzing the data and compare yourself and see, am I deviating from my baseline? So that's what, that's what we look at, start with the field test events, field test equipment, use the automation process to do the commissioning and turn up, and also use the, the analytics to allow you to keep your services up and running properly. I think those are the only 3 questions that we have received during this session. As I said, thank you very much for attending, and there is a survey at the end of the session, so if you can please take a moment to fill it up, I would really appreciate it. And for any additional information, you can look at our website, x4.com, and for the analytics platform, it's x4.com/extract, XTRACT. Thank you very much, and have a good day.